Travis Decker was a wanted father on the run. Carol Whitmore was a young mother who vanished without a trace a decade earlier. Their lives should never have crossed, but when bones were discovered in the search for Travis, investigators uncovered a chilling connection that no one expected. Travis Decker's name first appeared in local headlines in the spring of 2021, when he failed to appear in court for charges connected to fraud and theft. He was a father of 2 young children, the kind of man neighbors described as distant but polite, someone who kept to himself and rarely caused any disturbance. His sudden disappearance came as a shock to many, especially because of the trail he left behind. Before vanishing, he withdrew nearly all the money from his joint bank account, abandoned his car on a rural road, and dropped his children off with relatives without offering a reason. To his family, it seemed like an impulsive act, but detectives would later uncover signs that Travis had been preparing for weeks, maybe months, to disappear from his old life. At first, the case was treated as a simple fugitive search. Travis wasn't the first person to run from the law, and authorities assumed he had simply slipped into another state or crossed the border. Investigators checked bus stations, train depots, and airports, hoping to find a trace of him. But Travis seemed to vanish without leaving a single reliable lead. His phone stopped pinging cell towers, his bank cards went unused, and no surveillance cameras picked him up anywhere outside his small Missouri town. For months, the only evidence came from scattered sightings that often contradicted one another. One trucker swore he saw him hitchhiking near Kansas City, while a hiker reported a man resembling Travis in the Ozark forests, carrying a heavy backpack. These accounts were never confirmed, leaving authorities uncertain whether they were chasing an active fugitive or looking for a man who was already dead. As weeks turned into months, the search grew colder. Friends and relatives began to accept the idea that Travis had no intention of coming back. Some believed he had started a new life under another name, perhaps even overseas. Others thought the wilderness had swallowed him, leaving his remains somewhere deep in the forests he was said to know well. Detectives struggled to keep the case alive, but without new evidence, their resources were stretched thin. It was not until volunteers joined the search effort, combing through rugged terrain on weekends, that the mystery took a darker and unexpected turn. One chilly autumn morning, a group of searchers decided to sweep through a ravine several miles from where Travis A.S.' abandoned car had been discovered. The area was overgrown, filled with fallen branches and thick underbrush, the kind of place easy to overlook during earlier searches. As they moved deeper into the woods, one volunteer spotted something unusual beneath a layer of dried leaves. At first, it looked like the remains of an animal, perhaps a deer, but a closer look revealed the truth. Human bones, scattered and weathered, lay partially hidden in the soil. Next to them were a pair of rusted eyeglasses and scraps of torn fabric that resembled a flannel shirt. The volunteers froze, realizing they had stumbled upon evidence that could finally solve the mystery of Travis Decker, or open the door to something far more unsettling. The discovery of the bones shifted the entire case overnight. For months, the search for Travis Decker had been a frustrating chase with no real progress, but now investigators believed they had finally found their missing man. The scattered remains, the rusted eyeglasses, and the flannel shirt seemed to match the description of what Travis had been wearing when last seen. The wooded ravine was quickly sealed off as detectives, forensic teams, and medical examiners arrived to begin the painstaking process of collecting evidence. For the small Missouri town that had followed every twist in the story, it seemed certain that Travis had been found. People assumed that the wanted father had fled into the wilderness only to meet his end alone in the elements, a fugitive who never managed to escape his fate. But as investigators would soon learn, the case was about to take a disturbing and unexpected turn. The bones were transported to the state medical examiner's office, where experts carefully studied them. Almost immediately, inconsistencies began to appear. The skeletal remains did not match the age or build of Travis Decker. The bones were smaller, more delicate, and some showed signs of long-term exposure to weather far beyond the few months Travis had been missing. The eyeglasses, though rusted, were of a style rarely associated with men, and the tattered flannel shirt, though similar to what Travis had been wearing, looked much older and more worn. At first, these details raised eyebrows, but no one expected the conclusion that would soon be announced. After several days of analysis, the medical examiner delivered the shocking results. The bones did not belong to Travis Decker at all. They belonged to a woman, and she had been dead for more than 10 years. The revelation turned what had been a straightforward fugitive hunt into a possible murder investigation. Reporters rushed to cover the development, splashing headlines across the news about a second mystery hidden within the first. Families of long-missing women in the region anxiously contacted police, fearing the bones might belong to their loved ones. For investigators, the focus shifted from finding a missing father to identifying a woman who had been lost for over a decade. Detectives worked methodically, comparing dental records and DNA samples with old missing persons files. It did not take long for a match to emerge. The remains were identified as belonging to Carol Whitmore, a woman who had vanished from the same county in 2012. Carol had been reported missing after she failed to return home from a routine grocery trip, and despite an extensive search, no trace of her was ever found. Her disappearance had haunted her family for years, leaving unanswered questions and no closure. Now, her bones had surfaced in the very place volunteers searching for Travis Decker had chosen to explore. The discovery reopened a cold case no one expected to collide with Travis's story. How did the remains of a missing woman end up in the same ravine where searchers believed they might find Travis? Was it coincidence? Or had his disappearance somehow drawn investigators straight into a buried secret from the past? For detectives, the chilling answer was clear. What began as a search for a wanted man had just uncovered a forgotten crime, and the shadow over Travis Decker was about to grow much darker. The identification of the bones as belonging to Carol Whitmore sent shockwaves through the investigation. Her disappearance in 2012 had long been considered one of the town's most haunting unsolved mysteries. Carol had been a 31-year-old mother of one, last seen loading groceries into her car on a summer evening. Her vehicle was found in the parking lot, doors unlocked, and her purse still inside. For years, her case collected dust in storage, with no suspects and no new leads. Now, her remains had surfaced in a remote ravine nearly a decade later, not by accident, but during a search for a completely different missing person. The timing and location were too unusual to ignore. Detectives began to wonder whether Travis Decker's disappearance was somehow tied to Carol's fate. The first step was to determine whether Travis had ever crossed paths with Carol. At the time of her disappearance, Travis would have been in his 20s, working part-time jobs while struggling with debts and a failing marriage. Investigators dug through old employment records, scanning for anything that might link him to her. What they uncovered was unsettling. During the summer of 2012, Travis had briefly worked at a hardware store just a few miles from where Carol lived. More importantly, Carol's husband had been employed at the same store during that period. It was not a direct connection, but it placed Travis in the orbit of Carol's life at the exact time she vanished. Detectives began retracing Carol's final movements, revisiting witness statements from a decade earlier. Most people remembered nothing unusual, but one small detail stood out. A man was reported loitering near the grocery store parking lot around the time Carol disappeared. Back then, police dismissed it as irrelevant since the description was vague. Now, looking at the old notes with fresh eyes, investigators saw that the man was described as thin, with dark hair and glasses, details that loosely matched Travis in his younger years. It was far from proof, but it was enough to reignite suspicion. While detectives pieced together the past, forensic teams combed the area where Carol's bones had been found. Cadaver dogs picked up scents that led them to a dilapidated shack hidden among the trees. Inside, they found signs of someone having lived there recently. discarded food wrappers, old water bottles, and a makeshift bed of blankets and clothing. Even more disturbing was the discovery of a notebook buried beneath a pile of debris. The pages were filled with scribbles, lists, and coded entries. Among the words were names and dates, including Whitmore 2012, scrawled next to a series of numbers resembling dollar amounts. DNA testing on the items inside the shack revealed fresh traces belonging to Travis Decker. That discovery meant he had been hiding in the same woods where Carol's remains were found, possibly for months, and had left behind a cryptic record that linked him to her disappearance. Investigators were now faced with two grim possibilities. Either Travis had stumbled upon Carol's remains and bizarrely documented it, or he had been involved in her death from the beginning and returned to the site years later while on the run. The coincidences stacked too neatly, and suspicion around Travis deepened. What started as a search for a missing father now appeared to be unraveling into a tale of murder, secrets, and a man who may have carried more than financial crimes on his conscience. The shack, the notebook, and the bones all pointed toward a hidden truth that investigators were only beginning to uncover. The shack in the woods quickly became the centerpiece of the investigation. Forensic teams treated it as a crime scene, documenting every item, every mark, every scrap of paper that might reveal what had happened there. The notebook was the most unsettling discovery, its pages filled with erratic handwriting that veered between lists, calculations, and strange coded phrases. One line that caught everyone's attention read, "Whitmore 2012, paid in full," scrawled in thick, uneven strokes. The reference to Carol Whitmore was undeniable, but its meaning was open to interpretation. Some believed it hinted at a financial transaction gone wrong. Others saw it as a chilling admission of guilt. Investigators couldn't determine whether the entries were evidence of Travis S.'s direct involvement in Carol S.'s disappearance, or if they pointed to another individual who had controlled him. The DNA evidence confirmed that Travis had occupied the shack during the months he was missing. Traces of his hair and skin cells were found on the bedding, along with fingerprints smudged across jars, wrappers, and the notebook itself. Detectives began to construct a timeline. It appeared that after abandoning his car and vanishing, Travis had retreated into the forest, surviving in near isolation. But why would he choose to hide in the very area where Carol's remains were buried? It was either a bold move by someone confident that his secret would remain undiscovered, or an act of desperation by a man haunted by what he knew. Theories spread quickly. Some investigators suspected Travis had killed Carol years earlier and returned to the site while hiding, perhaps to relive the crime or to check if the remains were still concealed. Others proposed he had no involvement in Carol's death, but had stumbled across her bones and, for reasons no one could explain, began documenting them instead of alerting authorities. A third theory emerged that Travis had been silenced by someone else, perhaps the true killer, who realized his hiding place overlapped with an old crime scene. Whatever the truth, the mystery surrounding him grew heavier with each new discovery. As detectives pushed deeper into Travis's background, more unsettling connections came to light. Financial records revealed a series of unexplained deposits around the time of Carol's disappearance. They were small amounts spread over several months, but investigators wondered whether they represented hush money or payments tied to something darker. Witnesses from his past described him as restless and secretive, someone who often disappeared for hours without explanation. None of it was enough to prove he had been involved in Carol's death, but each detail chipped away at the possibility of coincidence. The community, once sympathetic to Travis's children and family, grew uneasy. People began to whisper that the missing father had been living a double life, one that stretched far beyond financial crimes. Rumors spread that he might have been linked to other disappearances in the area, though no evidence confirmed it. The woods where the shack stood became a symbol of unanswered questions, a place where two mysteries collided with no clear resolution. Detectives knew they needed to find Travis himself if they were ever to understand the truth. But with every passing day, hope of finding him alive slipped further away. and the sense that the investigation was closing in on something far darker than a fugitive SS escape only grew stronger. Do you want me to move forward with Chapter 5 at the same expanded 500-word pace, bringing the story to its conclusion with the final twist? The search for Travis Decker ended not with a rescue, but with another grim discovery. Weeks after the shack was processed, a fisherman walking along a riverbank several miles downstream spotted what looked like human remains tangled among driftwood. The current had carried the body into a shallow bend, leaving it exposed when the water level dropped. Authorities were called, and the remains were quickly confirmed as belonging to Travis through dental records. His body was badly decomposed, consistent with having been in the water for several months, which placed his death not long after his disappearance. The hope of questioning Travis, of extracting answers from him about Carol Whitmore and the strange notes in the shack, vanished instantly. Instead, investigators were left with a second crime scene and a set of questions that only grew more disturbing. The autopsy revealed that Travis had not drowned, nor had he died from natural causes. His skull bore clear signs of blunt force trauma, a crushing blow delivered with enough strength to kill him instantly. His ribs showed fractures that suggested he had been beaten, and yet there were no defensive wounds on his arms or hands. Experts concluded that he was likely ambushed, struck down before he had a chance to fight back. This finding shattered the theory that Travis had succumbed to the elements or taken his own life in despair. He had been murdered. The question now was by whom and why. Detectives revisited the evidence, searching for connections between Travis's violent end and the discovery of Carol's remains. One theory suggested that Travis had been the original killer, silencing Carol back in 2012, and someone, perhaps an accomplice or someone who had known the truth, turned on him once his hiding place in the woods came to light. Another possibility was that Travis had stumbled onto Carol S. bones accidentally and had been killed because of what he discovered. The notebook in the shack, with its strange references and coded entries, hinted that he had uncovered information he wasn't supposed to know. Investigators could not determine whether he had been recording his own secrets or someone else's. The community was divided. Some viewed Travis as a monster who had finally met justice in the form of vigilante revenge. Others saw him as a tragic figure, a man running from financial crimes who happened to cross paths with a deeper, older evil. Without evidence to point to a suspect, the case teetered between both interpretations. The river offered no clues as to how his body had been placed there, and no witnesses came forward to report suspicious activity in the area. Every lead investigators chased dissolved into dead ends. With both Carol and Travis gone, the truth about their connection, whether Travis was her killer, her accidental discoverer, or perhaps even another victim of the same hidden predator, remained frustratingly out of reach. The files on Travis's fraud case, Carol's disappearance, and the shack in the woods were eventually bundled together into a single unresolved investigation. For the families left behind, there was no comfort, only a chilling reminder of how two lives could intersect in the shadows without explanation. Years later, the case is still spoken of in hushed tones. Residents recall the eerie coincidence of bones discovered during a manhunt, the image of a shack filled with strange writings, and the body of a wanted father found beaten and discarded in a river. Travis Decker's story ended with his death, but the mystery that surrounded him never did. What truly happened in those woods, and who else may have known the secrets buried there, remains one of the town's darkest unanswered questions.